There are also some kind of ultimate stages of technological transhumanism, which are not really in existence today, but society is rapidly moving in this direction. One example of kind of an ultimate stage of technological transhumanism would be downloading your mind. That's what I talk about in my book, Virtually Human, that Professor DeVores mentioned at the beginning. So by being able to basically replicate your personality and your recollections, your choices in social media and stuff like that, whether you realize you're downloading your mind or not, you are. And for the first time in history, large portions of what's in our mind is actually stored outside of our mind in cloud servers. Of course, it's like super radical to then like dispense with your body. And that will also dispense with your mind unless both you have downloaded your mind and you've been able to access some software which doesn't exist anywhere in the world today that's able to provide a consciousness operating system to that downloaded mind. So this is something which is not in existence today, but I think all the technology trends are that it will be in existence before the middle of this century.
Welcome to What's Left, a weekly political discussion challenging the mainstream left. I'm Eduardo Barca with co-host, teacher and socialist Andy Lipson and writer and teacher Jessica. We are online at what'sleftpodcast.com. Again, at what'sleftpodcast.com. You can find that link to our blog in the episode notes. You can also find our personal social media handles as at Don Eduardo Barca and at SeptiKE for Kenny Sapeda on Instagram, and Jess's Twitter handle as at JHomie89. Please subscribe, rate, review, turn on your notifications, and share your favorite episode wherever you found this episode. Thank you. All right. We'll be discussing the topic of transhumanism, but before that, I'd like to introduce, well, I don't have to introduce, John Kleisig, who's been a frequent guest, who's been awesome, who's been a part of the What's Left family team. And so I'll just quickly say, for anyone that is listening to John Kleisig, you should check out his School World Order book, The Technocratic Globalization of Corporatized Education, by Trine Books. And he is a contributor to New Politics Center for Research on Globalization, Op-Ed News, The Intrepid Report, The Dissident Voice, and Unlimited Hangout. Welcome back, John Kleisig. It's great to have you here with us, Jake.
As always.
Well, thanks for joining us, Jake. And we look forward to having a discussion with you on transhumanism. For viewers and listeners who have been following us, we've had 2 of the last episodes on transgenderism and or trans ideology or trans issues, and we've had a very lively discussion. It was a very it was pushed onto us by Andy Lipson. It was adamant that we have that conversation. No, I'm kidding. No, it was a conversation that we were bound to have at some point, and we had it. People can check out the last 2 episodes, and these episode notes, and this episode notes. But today we're going to have the conversation on transhumanism, and we've invited Jake for that because there were conversations that were had. I was not in those conversations in previous episodes, but we hope that we can take on this issue just make a whole episode of it. I don't know if there's anything else you want to add, Andy or Jess.
I do. Just to say, in some ways, it feels like we've been talking about transhumanism in a number of episodes, at least certainly mentioning it. But for me, I really actually want to use this episode to just say, okay, what is this thing? One of the reasons, and Eduardo, when I said I want to do this episode, you kind of said, hey, that you would do it if we had Jake on. And I agree with you because in many ways, certainly with a person who comes from a background of Marxism, transhumanism is not part of the discussion among that section of the revolutionary left. And I became introduced to terms like transhumanism from Allison and from Jake, a little bit from my first readings of Whitney Webb's writing, But Jake, I think you are the person who has done the most to talk about it in a historical way, in a way that we would as Marxists if we were actually looking into this thing, which I think we should have been looking into this thing, and we haven't. And so that's why I really wanted you here, because I actually want all of us to have a discussion about what do we think transhumanism is. Like we did once have a discussion, what do we think Fourth Industrial Revolution is? And in some ways, my question is there a difference between Fourth Industrial Revolution and transhumanism? I think there might be, but in terms of how a person would describe it, but I'm not sure. So that's what I hope to do here, is to just sit and just talk and almost meditate on this thing. So to see what we all think it is and how we would, and then I think, Jake, you can fill in some pieces of some of the history of where it comes from. Like the woman, Jessica, can you remind me of the person who sent a video? You sent a video of. She's a trans person.
The Transgender to Transhumanism. Well, it's actually a book written by a man who thinks he's a woman, Martine Rathblatt, who is, I'm pretty sure, a self-proclaimed transhumanist.
Yeah.
And also, yeah, I mean, caught up in the Fourth Industrial Revolution for sure. Owns a pharmaceutical company and is cloning pigs and all of that kind of stuff, which we can get into or not. But
I'm sorry, hold on. Did you say that person in the interview owns a pharmaceutical company, or did I miss it?
He owns. It's called something therapeutics. Yeah, and they do like gene shit. They do cloning, all kinds of stuff. He is the highest earning woman CEO on the planet, except for the minor fact that he's a man. So yeah, he's not like, I sent that thing because I think last week we were talking about like members of the capitalist class, and he would certainly be a member of the capitalist class.
Okay.
We would agree on. I would agree on that. I will still call them she, but that's part of our discussion from last week. But I don't think that's the reason we're talking about it. What I thought was so useful about you sending that out, Jessica, was the fact that they were like, they very much saw the connection in the way that you talked about it between their transgender experience and beliefs and the pushing a transhumanist agenda. And so it was, and in doing that, it made me say, well, what would we say transhumanism is? Some of these definitions may come from that presentation, but even their notion, Martine's notion of transhumanism was like, they were saying it came back from some comic book in 1996. So it seemed like they had very little understanding of even the history, their own history of transhumanism. That, to me, that person had little knowledge of actually the way I've heard about the history of transhumanism, because it's got a richer history than that. It's my understanding. So anyway, so I feel like having Jake here is somebody, for me, gives me another authoritative voice who's looked more into this stuff and can fill out our conversation about it.
And so before we even delve deeper into this, can we just define transhumanism? Let's just get back to like the fundamental. I think it's important. I don't know if you want to take a shot at it. I pulled up just in reading about it over this week. I just thought, just do something like the Britannica Encyclopedia of what they say. It's just a brief definition. Should I do that, or does someone else want to take a shot at it?
Go ahead.
All right. Well, this is defined as in the Britannica. Transhumanism, philosophical and scientific movement that advocates the use of current and emerging technologies such as genetic engineering, cryonics, artificial intelligence, and nanotechnology to augment human capabilities and improve the human condition. Transhumanists envision a future in which the responsible application of such technologies enables humans to slow, reverse, or eliminate the aging process to achieve corresponding increases in human lifespans and to enhance human cognitive and sensory capacities. The movement proposes that humans with augmented capabilities will evolve into an enhanced species that transcends humanity, the, quote, posthuman, unquote. So that is, I think, wraps it up.
Yeah, it was kind of fast, but I think I mostly agree with that definition. I mean, just on a very basic level, I just think about like the etymology, and it's like trans, right? As in to go beyond or to transcend. So yeah, I mean, like transcending what it is to be human, superhuman, moving beyond. I don't know that I really have a whole lot to add just on a like definitional level.
I think the parts that I would take issue with, because that definition in of itself is a sell job, right? Because it speaks of the process as augmentation, as improvement, and and then it kind of at the very end it kind of says, oh, by the way, we're going to create a new species. And to me, it's not even just the notion of creating a new species. It's separating people's separating people's identity from themselves and putting it into an electronic form, in a digital form, with the idea that, well, again, the sell point, with the idea that this type of person separated from their body is.
Does it have to be digital?
I believe it does. In my opinion, that's just, and somebody can put it in a different way, but I believe it's explicitly stating that this new species is a digital species and that it exists outside the body and therefore can grow and live forever. And so that's the piece that to me is what transhumanism is that goal. Now, again, that also it comes within a class divided society, so it only speaks of what the future could be like for the rulers. In my opinion, it is silent on what the lives would be like for the people who are ruled. But that's another question, because I don't believe that fate, living forever within a thing, is one that's actually being constructed for the people who are going to stay as humans. But anyway, that is my opinion about what transhumanism is.
Yeah, I mean, all of that is accurate. I would say that I would add a little more historical context to it and just say that it's the second iteration of eugenics, and historically it comes out of eugenics. It was Julian Huxley, who was Aldous Huxley's brother. Julian was the first director general of UNESCO. He was the president of the British Eugenics Society, and in a book published in either 1958 or 1959. The book is titled New Bottles for New Wine, which is a play on, it's a biblical scripture. It's in Matthew and a couple of the other Gospels. It refers to the context of when Christ is referring to what's sometimes called being born again. All right, and if you're born again, you don't, using the metaphor of the wine and the wineskin, you don't put new wine in an old wineskin. You have to put it in a new wineskin. So you need a new body. And so Julian is playing on that term, and it's in that book that he coins the term. Transhumanism basically says that we can still control the evolution of the human species through the selective process, the selective breeding process, and through that would have been known as positive eugenics, is what they referred to it, when the so-called superior genetic specimens would basically interbreed, coupled with what they call negative eugenics, which is where they would basically remove the so-called unfit from the, I air quoted the wrong part, the unfit part should have been air quoted. They removed them from the gene pool through sterilization, euthanasia, abortion, etc. He says we can still do all of that, but really the way that we're going to evolve, he says, is through machines and ideas. And machines, this is 58, so we don't have the modern information technologies, the digital computers that we have now, although a lot of the ideas were already the theories were sort of laid out at the Macy Cybernetics conferences. So the concept was already there. He wasn't just working with the idea of old school, the mechanical industrial revolution. And, they had this digital revolution in mind. And so it's the transhumanism is the outgrowth of eugenics. It has largely the same goals, which is to control evolution. I would also just add that it basically synthesizes the biological and the psychological sciences, so the concept of nature and nurture. So nature being the whole field of eugenics, nurture being the idea that you can engineer humanity based on how you structure the environment and how they would psychologically respond with particular behaviors in reaction to particular environmental stimuli. So you take that and you basically take the stimulus through a series of evolutions through, like, there's a lot of the stuff I talked about is ed tech. You develop something called neurotech, and then basically you can program the biology and the psychology directly through the body, through the neurotech. And one more thing I just want to say is that there is also, and I think this will get us into some of the stuff that y'all talked about last time, or in relation to the video that we're discussing today as well. And that is that with the changes in the actual physiological and technological structures of the body and the environment merging together, as that happens, you need to recategorize those things in terms of not just linguistic categories, but in terms of values. And so along with that comes new value systems that are talked about in that video. Some of them sort of this transgender ideology bridging the gap. But if you notice in that video, she also refers to basically once we start synthesizing digital or computational consciousnesses, that this will create another category of personhood that will get us another step closer to the end game, which is something that you might distinguish between the transhuman and the posthuman. I know you read that and said that they're sort of synonymous, but there's people argue about that, and some people say that the posthuman is where the transhuman is where we're still largely biological, but we got some wearables and some implantables, and you're sort of half cyborg, half person. Versus the posthuman is you've been entirely downloaded. You're completely digital, existing either in a VR or a nanobot swarm or a robotic swarm or a robotic machine or something to that degree. So just to recap, I know that's a lot. Just to recap, right? It's basically eugenics. It's the synthesis of the biological and the psychological sciences through neurotech, and it also involves a new system of values. And there might be a difference between transhuman and post.
I appreciate you saying that, Jake, about eugenics compared to the eugenics movement, because I also think that is a part of the agenda, that to breed superhumans. At some point in one of the episodes in the very beginning of What's Left, I remember we talked about technology possibly being able to liberate the working class from like the workforce that was tedious, or that or just being like this thing that chained us, right? Like, and technology was able to possibly free us from some of those tasks so that we can be creative people. I think you remember that, Andy, that we had a discussion like that. But the more especially after we've talked to Alison, and the more I keep thinking about these things, it's just like the more blood we have to be, and I think that this desire to breed superhumans is not like, it's not far-fetched. Sometimes I feel when we discuss things like Davos and the World Economic Forum and stuff, like I feel, or the Fourth Industrial Revolution or anything of this, I sometimes feel as if people might just consider us conspiracists, but this stuff is actually happening. And so I wanted just to pull up just a few things, just very briefly, like that this is not far-fetched. Just like in my just like in the episode of Sex Tech, there are concrete, real things and people we can point to that show and demonstrate that this is in the works. This is really in the works, and we're not just talking like just to talk here for viewers and listeners. Like this is and this is real stuff. for example, there's synthetic production of hormones such as, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, I'm just reading erythropoietin, which is naturally produced in the kidneys and increases the production of red blood cells, and adaptive technology such as bionic implants and carbon fiber prosthetics are sought out not only by people with blood disorders or disabilities, but also by non-disabled athletes looking to boost their performance. So these are things that are going to be used, and people who are, that's just like very minor. I can bring up other examples, but like the people who are pushing for this stuff, obviously is Silicon Valley. The transhumanism is supported by Larry Page, the co-founder of Google, and as well as Tesla's Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and all these people, and they're creating labs that are going to push for these things. I just don't know how else, like how else, or how, what this craving, or this, what do you call it, this desire for us to like enhance ourselves is to live far like more than beyond like the years that we have. Okay, I have the suspicion that like Queen and other royals have these humans that give them their parts, their like organs, like young organs, and then transplant it. And the reason why I have this suspicion is because I'm Mexican, all right? And in Mexico, you can basically go to a black market, all right? And you can go buy organs for people to have transplants. This is actually, like, I've been to those markets. So I'm thinking if this can be done by people who have money, middle class folk, this certainly can be done by the rich, the powerful and the rich. And so I don't know if I want to include that part. Maybe that's too far out there. Like, this is a suspicion. But to me,
Eduardo, like Rathblatt, not to bring everything back to him, but Rathblatt, one of the things that he's like really striving toward with all of these companies that he owns is to have limitless organ donations for everybody who would possibly need an organ, whether it's because it's like medically necessary, or because it's like, oh, I want this organ as an expression of my identity as like human rights or whatever. Like that, this is like, that's not a coincidence. Yeah, we should, oh my God, we should do a whole episode on fucking the organ transplant.
Yeah, it's crazy. Like, this is the reason why. Go ahead, Jake.
No, I'm just listening. I'm just like,
no, but this is like me being Latino and from Latin America. I was just telling Jess yesterday, I think it was, there are women who are now giving up their bodies to surrogacy. This is unregulated. And you can sign off babies to give away. Like, this stuff can be done. And who is this market for? U.S. Americans who are coming to Colombia. That is what I've just, even on the BBC, a mainstream news source that just reported on that. So I'm not like, that's why Latinos don't have like, they have a lot of conspiracist ideas, because we see this on the ground. And so for us to think that the elite, rich and powerful, could do this, it's not far-fetched for us, because there's a lot of people that already do it who have money and power, and they just go to these markets and get this stuff. So this desire to live longer, I'm just reading here, I'm going to read this. In 2013, Larry Page, the Google co-founder that I mentioned, launched Calico Life Sciences, LLC, Calico Labs, a research and development company dedicated to extending the human lifespan through advanced technologies. In early 2022, Bezos and other backers invested $3 billion in Altos Labs, a biotechnology company seeking to reverse aging and disease. Musk founded SpaceX in 2002 in hopes of establishing human colonies on the moon and Mars, and launched Neuralink in 2016 to develop implantable brain chips. Implantable brain chips. Like, this is not just Black Mirror. In July 2022, the brain chip company Cycron announced that it had successfully implanted a chip in the brain of an ALS, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. I'm terrible. Sorry, English is not my first language. Patient in the United States. The chip was designed to enable severely paralyzed patients to operate digital forms of communication with their thoughts. So I'm just telling you, like, real world stuff, so that we can begin this episode with your mind whoever's listening and viewers and listeners, like with an open mind to like, this is real stuff that's happening. And I hope that this conversation continues and we explore in depth, like what this means as folks, like what the society, what's going to look like for us and why we should oppose it. Anyhow, that's just my comment. So thank you for bringing that up about eugenics compared to the eugenics movement, or a part of the eugenics movement.
Well, I think it's interesting, like the connection that you brought up with surrogacy. I mean, with the organ thing, and then surrogacy as well. Because I don't know. I mean, maybe this is a whole different conversation, but I totally view surrogacy as eugenics and transhumanist. So yeah, I mean, it's part of like this whole notion of selecting, selective breeding, the idea that your body is just like this vessel. So yeah, I mean, we could unpack that particular lane more, but I feel like maybe Andy, you had thoughts on like the transhumanist definitions before.
Yeah. So I don't know if y'all agree with what I'm going to say. So I'm going to go ahead and first off, Eduardo, I think all the things you spelled out they're happening. And the only part I would disagree with is the notion that the implant is being created so the people who can't move is to empower anybody who is not disempowered. It is completely a tool for ruling class empowerment, in my opinion. And I want to speak to it a little bit more later. And the question of harvesting people's organs, whether they be from third world countries or poor, that's not something that might be happening. Actually, I'm pretty sure there's a long history of that kind of stuff going on for all the time that modern science has been able to do organ transplants. Is there has been a class divide issue around that, which has only gotten more pronounced, to the point where I'll even say, in light of the fact that I do believe secret societies exist, I do believe that they are willing to kill children and drink their blood, and these are things that elite people will do in places like Bohemian Grove, and the weird ass places that they get to. Then, of course, the idea that those people have some sort of dream of living forever by consuming parts or integrating parts of other humans, absolutely. And that to me is not a conspiracy. That's how these people are. But I guess the part I want to, so for me, because when I talk about socialism, really socialism is really about an end. Of course, there's a process, but it's about an end. Working class taking powers, working class democracy. Whether a person agrees with that, but it's about an end. It's about the reason a person would be defined as a socialist is because of the revolution that they're fighting for or that they want. And in the same way as a capitalist would want a particular end. It's not, the process is less important as about to the end. And that's what is important for me about defining transhumanism. Because while there can be a process to transhumanism, and that person, I still can't pronounce their name, but whatever, talked about that process and said there was a spectrum from contact lenses to integrating certain, changing your DNA in certain ways. They were pretty explicit that the end was to separate yourself from a DNA-based reproduction to a data-based reproduction. That is, for an electronic reproduction, where you were reproducing code, reproducing electronically as opposed to reproducing as a biological being. And that end to me is critical to understand. Like, that's what transhumanism is. I don't know why there's people even saying posthumanism versus transhumanism. To me, transhumanism is about the fact that there is a set of people who want to live forever and who know that their biological selves cannot do it. And so they have come upon the idea, well, that's part of it. They have partly come upon the idea that they need to separate their mind, essentially their mind, what they see as their mind or soul, data-wise, into something that can contain it forever and it can live forever from the body, which is finite. So that to me is a key feature of transhumanism, because built into that is a divide which has always existed in capitalism and has only grown greater and greater, which is mental and manual labor. The rulers, to the extent that there's rulers, they have always put themselves in the area and of the mental workers, if you will, and that physical workers, manual workers, and I'm not just talking about truck drivers, but anybody who has where your body is a part of what you do. The more that is part of something you do, you are on the exploited end of the spectrum. And the tendency has been, the more you are on the mental part of it, the possibility for rule exists. And to me, transhumanism is the final break, like the final perfect state of the separation of the mental from the manual, of the physical from the mental. And it makes very much sense to me that when we talk about that, for the transhumanist, when they vision ruling, that's them ruling as the new species with them downloaded onto a computer. But when you think about the people who are going to experience the semi-transhumanism, and this is why I don't call it transhumanism, are going to be the ruled. Those are going to be the people with implants. Those are going to be people with their physical bodies, but the implants are ways that the data essentially can control them. Because it gets back to me to Cyborg 2050, essentially. All those different things that they were putting into those soldiers were always about having them connected to a central brain that was, and they talked about it in terms of AI, but to me, when you think about transhumanism, I don't think about AI. I mean, AI is going to be there. I think about electronic transhumanist heads, that is, people who are data dumping themselves down into this form where they see themselves as controlling humanity through the physical world, through their electronic place that they exist. And so I don't put all that cyborg craziness as part of the transhumanist. I see that as just an outcome of them building a control mechanism for how the mental world, which is going to be the digital world, will control the physical world. And they're going to be in the mental world, and they're going to be in that digital world, and the rest of us are going to be in the physical world, but tied to it through implants and things that make it such that we are subject to them, that we can be controlled by them, that we can be monitored by them, and ultimately directed by them. So that's, again, I know for me, I always blend it with the way I see the world constructed as a Marxist and how I see capitalism working. But for me, transhumanism has to be understood as the endpoint of what they call a new species, not the process part. The process part is less important than where it goes to the end. And that's why I would never say, well, if you think a post-humanist thinks different than transhumanist, then I don't know what a transhumanist is. Transhumanist to me has to mean what that one person who gave the talk, the Martine person, that you're looking to create a new species in the digital realm. And she put it in terms of everyone can have access to it. In fact, we're going to help you pay for it. That's horseshit. I believe it's going to be reserved for only the people who will rule.
Like, they want to design a lot of this stuff initially as for disabilities, right? So Parkinson's syndrome, or epilepsy, or right, prosthetics, limbs, right? People that are paralytic, things like that. Okay, but then with something like, with let's just go with the prosthetics, right? Like, was his name Oscar Pistorius? Wasn't he the guy that they called Blade Runner? Okay, now he runs faster than you with your regular legs, right? And so now, right, in the economy, let's just say that the people who were once at a disadvantage based on whatever disability they might have had, now they're at an advantage because of this accommodative technology. So then the economy moves in a direction that favors these people. So that means that even if you're not disabled, right, you're going to be incentivized to keep up. And so this thing just will keep going. And if you're talking about the brain chip stuff, or, again, a lot of it's for, to help with different, neurological issues. The recent hoopla over the Chat GPT, right? And this thing is writing essays, and everybody's like, oh, wow. By the way, it's funded by Open AI Labs, it's developed by Open AI Labs, and that was funded by Elon Musk, and he was like a co-chair or something of it as well. But they're basically saying something like, well, this thing is going to be it's going to basically replace a Google search engine. Because why just ask Google to just pull up a bunch of sources and then read through it when you can ask this thing a question? And it can not only right, pull up the information, but sort of explain it to you in a very particular way. So in other words, think about now, I can see a time, because I know how academics are, where that will be an accommodative or assistive technology for a student who has cognitive, is not cognitively on par with other students that whatever it might be, some language processing, whatever. So it'll be, you'll get when you teach your class and you get the letters.
Neurologically divergent. Yeah, they'll say.
Yeah, right. And you get those letters. This student's allowed these things when he or she is taking the test. Well, they'll be like, well, this student can use Chat GPT. So then the other student, well, so hold on. So then the other students will be like, well, why can't I use Chat GPT? And then it'll just be like, well, let's plug it in the Neuralink, and everybody has a Chat GPT. So what I'm saying, I guess I'm agreeing with what you're saying as far as where this goes and sort of the end game with it. There's other things I would add, but I'm just gonna stop right there. But that's yeah.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's so true. That, like, obviously everybody in my department was talking about that recently, and it was so funny to me because, like, one of the first suggestions that one faculty member had for, like, how we deal with this new, frontier or whatever of artificial intelligence writing essays or whatever, because everyone's concerned about plagiarism. Like, that's like the underlying issue. And they were like, oh my God, like, there's this app that you can use to, detect it or whatever. And I'm like, okay, so our solution for this technological problem is another technological, like, yeah, I don't even know what the app was, but it's just, oh my God, academics, like, you can kind of see, like, kind of back on what you were saying about, like, the separation of the mind, Andy, from, I forget how you put it, but, essentially, like, the fleshy, the fleshy body or whatever. You can see why, like, all of the fucking transhumanists, I mean, not all of them, but, like, so many of them they emerge from academia, or, like, that's the talk that we watched, right? Like, I think it was University of Victoria, and it's like a department of transhumanism or whatever, and all of the academics are, studying it and singing praises and everything. Anyway, yeah, that I'm basically just ranting about academics, but yeah, I think the chat thing was a good example of where we're headed.
And by the way, it's not that. It's if you just write headlines, it sounds like it's way more pseudo sentient than, you know what I mean. Like, I saw a panel of a bunch of other professors that were like, I asked it this, it got it wrong. I asked it this, it got it wrong. But there's so a lot of that, I think, is, the hype that it got, I think, is to get us to believe in the wonders of transhumanism and AI and have us like, oh, before it. But if it does go in the direction they want it to, that's what I would see is.
Yeah, and if it's not that, it'll be something else. Yeah, I agree. It's like overblown, but at the same time, once we're done talking about it, the faculty just go back to asking for more technology in their classrooms. Like, okay, great.
Well, I mean, I guess I want to go back to Andy's comment for a bit, because I feel as if I have conflicting views on this. I'm not sure if, I just want to be clear. You're saying that it's beyond the cyborg enhancement world. You're saying that we're going to eventually that's one step of this movement, but it really is to basically download us into this database for the future. Is that what you're arguing?
Yeah. And again, I am a Marxist. Workers and capitalists. Workers are going to be wearables and implants. Capitalists are going to be data. They are going to be essentially working in the ether world with AI to control the people who are connected to the wearables. So I think we have to understand these technologies in a class divided society, not as a spectrum, not as a but as you will be directed one way and the elite will be going another way. They'll sell the project simultaneously to all of us, talking about it in terms of like the way, as if these things are being developed for people with paralysis. That has zero to do with why these technologies are being developed. First of all, it's about profits entirely, and it's about really ultimately profits and further control or total control, while you're maximizing profits in their mind, are going to be under this system where you have now completely separated mind from body. Body does the work, mind does the decision making.
Yeah, I see. I guess for me, I'm wondering, I don't know if it necessarily is for the entire population for us to be downloaded into a database. Maybe half or more than half, yes, but there is going to be, in my mind, going to be a sector or people that will have to still work in some form of, not like the agriculture we see today, but in feeding these bodies that we have. And they're going to be used and enhanced in order to take care of the rest of the workers who are like us, that are, I guess, downloaded and hooked up to the ether of the internet. It just, to me, I don't see it plausible for the entire world just to be, I mean, maybe that's but it is for me, like, some folks are going to have to be actively engaged in this material world. And that will require, this breeding of humans, our super babies, designing them, and experimentation. I think we've seen that, for example, in Nazi, right? Like concentration camps of people being experimenting on babies. But it is going to, for me, it's going to, I think it will take for people to continue to live here with those cyborg enhancements. It's kind of what I've been, when you were talking, I was thinking this in my head, and I thought I'd share that because it's I want to say, it's I don't know, the whole world of global societies to get there. I don't know. There's something about, I don't know if we will do that. Some of us will be, there is a SpaceX, right? More programs that will be launched and people leaving. And I think that there are limits, or there needs to be people still continuously engaging interactively, physically. That will not, we're just still humans. I think our biology will keep us from being completely downloaded. It's my thinking.
Yeah, Andy, I was actually curious. I think I understood what you were saying, but like, if you think that end goal, especially in terms of the way you're talking about the capitalist class, like, I agree about workers. It's like, we're still going to be working. It's just, we're going to have to add, we're going to be faster and more efficient because we're going to have bionic limbs and wearables and chips and shit, right? But in terms of like the capitalist class becoming data, I don't know if that's what you said, but do you think that's like achievable? And what do you think? What does that mean? Like, what is that?
I still think that. So for me, I understand why this dream is achieved, why this dream is pursued by them. You could put it in terms of living forever, and these people have always been essentially about death, and so, and then at the same time they're terrified of death, and so they want that, and they have egos that are off the charts, so they feel like there's somehow somewhat a benefit to keep these types of creatures alive forever, and they're only going to do that digitally. So in their minds, that's how I see it operating individually. But as a class, I feel like they understand that in order to get control, they have to move ever further and separate themselves from the people they are controlling, and have to create all sorts of distance from them, and at the same time have to strengthen the bonds of control. And that's why I see, like, when you look at a factory has all these machines moving around. Why are those machines moving around? What are they connected to that's moving these machines around? Software, computers. Okay, And I want to say that even the physical computer that is connected to is more physical than they want to be. They just want to be the software. They just want to be the code that directs everything and is seemingly untouchable. And so that's how I see this. And so I do have a question of what the connection is between AI and these creatures that they hope to become. Because AI is a different thing. AI is being built now within the data that's being collected by everything and everyone all the time. So I believe, actually, in my vision, AI is actually a mental competitor with these rulers as it develops. So that, to me, is like, do they have this notion that they're going to get over on AI? But I very much believe that all the physical stuff that they're talking about, the cyborg stuff, is just for the humans that are left to do the work. And they're not going to need a lot, because they're going to get us, we'll be chasing wage dollars by getting the best up-to-date programs or wearables that will allow us to lift more or do more or think faster, whatever we have to do for the capitalists to get their dollar in our pocket. Well, it won't be in our pocket, into our bank, digital bank. That's how they're going to get us. And that's what they've been doing. We chase that cheese. So that's how I see this kind of going.
I would critique that a little bit and say that they want to be at the top of the transhumanist, posthumanist pyramid. They want to be able to do and be both at the same time. What I mean is, they want to be able to live in a virtual realm as software data, but they also want to be able to then come back and interact with the physical environment, either through robotics or through, as was discussed in that video and is discussed by Kurzweil, and there was a Russia 2045 project with some Russian billionaire. Kurzweil was at this event, and they laid out a progression of different transhumanist evolutions. And the highest form for them would be what that was talked about in the video. The Rathblatt talked about the foglet people, or the Infinite comic book. It's basically a swarm of nanobots. All right, and so basically, that spectrum you're talking about that has the destination. Like, I think when they say transhumanism in that instance, leading to posthumanism, they mean like transitional more than transcendent. And the transitional phases, I mean, this is how I came to the conclusions in my book, was because I was working with this Watson thing that's data mining, right? And so it's basically making algorithms so that it's going to be able to do what I do. So I'm like, okay, so this thing is copying my intellectual cognitive algorithms, and then it's going to be able to perform those narrow functions in a narrow platform, right? Okay, and then I started to see the wearables. Okay, so now AI is going to learn how to recognize emotions, and I saw robotics that they said they were therapy bots for autistic kids, because the expressions were very uniform, and I guess the autistic people oftentimes have a hard time reading body language, and because supposedly these robots that had clear smiley face, whatever, frowny face, that right. So now the robot's doing two things, right? AI is data mining and copying and performing thinking algorithms and feeling algorithms, okay? And then they have robots that are going to go ahead and act that out. Okay, so now all you need at this point is something like Neuralink, and I just did a podcast the other day, so I watched some videos on it, and the Neuralink company referred to it as a Fitbit in the brain. Well, what does a Fitbit do? It data mines all your various biometrics. So now you've got the kinesthetic algorithms, the thinking algorithms, the feeling algorithms. Eventually, what this thing is doing, while it's helping you move around and stuff, it's taking that data, and it can eventually basically scan a map of your brain and all the different algorithms, right? We've already sort of categorized them beforehand, and we've developed them into narrow functions. Now we take that, and ideally, they think they'll be able to aggregate all those different the feeling, the thinking, the moving. They'll be able to scan it together, first put it in a virtual realm, but eventually be able to download it either into a robot, or the foglet body would do was enable you to behave in the real world the same way that you could behave in the metaverse. Meaning in the metaverse, right, you can be different avatars, right? You don't have to have the same body every day because you can just pick this new, right, character or whatever. And what the metaverse is going to do in the interim is basically calibrate the way that your avatar interacts with other virtual objects. That will create the calibrate the algorithms for you to move from to be a software being in the metaverse to come out and to interact with through augmented reality in the physical world through the Internet of Things. It'll take the calibrations of how you interact with the digital objects, overlay that onto the physical objects, and then you would, through your foglit body, you could push a little button or whatever you do, you think it in metaverse or whatever, and your little nanobots, think of each one as like a pixel on a screen and it would just take the shape you want with the colors you want, and then you would interact with your Internet of Things the same way you would with the metaverse. And so that's what they want. But so then the question is, will there still be these halfway cyborgs? Because at that point, why do you need to have these sort of arrested development cyborgs? Like at that point, if they're able to get that far down the pipe, you're telling me you couldn't just engineer a bunch of other nanobot vehicles or robots that could do everything that a person could do and not have to worry about it having some sort of volition outside of how it's programmed? Like, so I think that, when you talk about the workers being exploited and there being these two different paths, I would say that, again, it's that transhuman transitional species is basically just there to be the guinea pigs to extract the data, calibrate it, refine it, and then eventually use it to become this virtual / nanobot creature, right? And then your question about, well, how does that relate to the broader AI, right? Like, well, I think one of the desires is not just that you'll get to live forever and get to be different bodies and all this other stuff, but it is that that you'll be able to interface with and integrate and pull from basically a Google / Chat GPT or whatever becomes the next iteration. But all that information that's on the internet, that you would have it at immediate disposal, not just to be able to download it and know it, but to be able to use the information itself to perform other functions through the Internet of Things, sort of like you were saying, like being the data that commands the economy to do these different things. So I don't know that, I don't know. I certainly don't think that they want everybody to be these so-called gods that they tout. But so I agree with you there. But as far as like, will they keep regular people around at all? I think is a whole nother question. Yeah.
How are they gonna like power all this shit with data mines under the sea or what?
Well, that's interesting, because that was another thing I was thinking, and I've said it before, but I've meant it more in terms of batteries, like for data, like data generators, like so this I've talked about ed tech, like the students that can't get their algorithms up high enough that you won't even be allowed to do like the most remedial jobs. Like you'll just watch ads all day, and we'll extract value from you based on the analytics we can get for marketing and behavior algorithms and things like that. But there was a recent article in Yahoo so they're already on to 6G, and actually they were thinking about it when I wrote the book. Okay, but that part of one of the ideas they have for 6G is that human beings will be antennas or batteries. In other words, you will be sort of a tower that will either transmit the energy or the data, but ostensibly also it could be some of the energy could be extracted. So maybe where they get the energy from is it's like some Matrix stuff where basically they're literally pulling it off of and maybe that might be a reason why they would keep around this halfway transhuman cyborg creature or something, to fuel everything else.
Well, I mean, I just think that's those are my suspicions, Jake. That there would be this half-human cyborg creature attending to these to the rest of the humans that are going to be plugged in. That's kind of my. I mean, AI could do it, but AI also needs to be controlled by what? A human. I mean, or you know what I mean? It's kind of like, this is the suspicion that I have. It's a little, I don't know, it's talking about this, it's like, it's quite out there, but you know, it's not, like I said, so far-fetched. It is what we're seeing. I mean, designing babies, refrigerating bodies, enhancing augmentation, like all this stuff is happening. So, but that's as far as like, I think that you're confirming my suspicions, Jake.
Yeah, and I'm not sure I answered Jessica's question about, is this possible? I'm just going to use like again, if I'm going to use Marxism as a guide, like my understanding of it, I believe the capitalists are trying to arrive at a post-capitalism, arrive at a place outside of capitalism. I at least think they believe that capitalism is going to run them aground. And I agree with Jake that they're going to essentially eliminate workers, human workers. And I think that I didn't listen to many of the questions that were asked to Martine person, but one of the questions was, hey, Martine, you do understand that it's not just about having one identity in the metaverse or in this world. You could have multiple identities. That means one person, one consciousness can be 12 nanobot movers in the physical world, different of sorts. So in a sense, in their dream, I believe, they can eliminate workers and they can become both the thought and the deed, all bound into one, and all just controlled with nobody saying you're not paying me enough. Essentially, no one's saying I need this for my kids or for my husband or for my wife or my family. Just basically the controller completely aligned with the controlled, and the controlled being the nanobots and the controller being this brain thing. So I could see that, and in a multiple form. I don't think post-capitalism is achievable without revolution and without socialist revolution. So I have to say, I don't think what they're trying to do is achievable. I think capitalism will destroy itself. And this is one of the ways, because I believe profits only come from human labor. That's a Marxist theory, where surplus value, labor theory of value. But that's as much as I can say.
I mean, Jake, do you have something to say before?
I mean, it would kind of go in another direction too. I would just pose the question of if you can copy yourself, you're this, so you download, scan your brain, your identity. They probably don't believe in the soul, so I won't use that term, but maybe they do, right? But whatever that thing, your consciousness, once you download it, if you can copy it, and then it can be, right, it could be existing in multiple forms at the same time. My real question is that you, right? And that's a question that they brought up. Like, is the I part of all the stuff that happens in here, whether it's neurotransmitters, electricity, or whatever, like the part of you that you would call yourself? Like, in other words, once you get copied, do you, right? Is this person in here? Is this experience in here? Is it there too, or is it basically just a really, really sophisticated GIF? You know what I mean, right? Like, the GIF is programmed to do something you do, and it's just. But so think of a GIF that can do, right, for every mannerism you have. It's got a little algorithm for every thought, every feeling, right, and they just put it all together, and so it talks looks like you, it acts like you, it talks like you, but is it just basically pulling from a bunch of basically scripted, but mixed together in a way where it almost seems, right, organic and real all the time? Like, is
it's like a digital clone almost.
Yeah, and I would like to stay with that question, because that's a really good question. The idea, and this was posed by the Martine person, or they pretty much said that your true self is only in your intellect, is in your feelings and thoughts and things like that.
Means.
Yeah, right. And I will say that I don't believe that's not my belief. Like my belief is that I am an integration of my emotional, spiritual self, mental self with my physical self. Like I'm shaped so much by the parts of like, okay, I'm able to like, do certain things with my body that I know I can do. I also know that my eyesight's going, and other times my eyesight's been good. My teeth are fucked up, but that's just been part of my life. Like all those things, whether they be shaming based or pride based, have all been part of the development of me. So I don't make a separation between mind and body, and nor would I. But I would say what's interesting to me is that, and Jake, you might know more about that. What the transhumanists say about their intellectual self, isn't that the same way? And I'm not saying this to throw shade. I'm just saying, don't Christians look at just the body as like a shell, almost like a pointless shell or useless shell? So in that regard, because I don't see it that way, I do see these things as integrated, like together, body and mind and soul and spirit. Although I'm an atheist, but I'm just using those terms. Don't Christians say this is just to be shed and not really that meaningful? And so that the thing inside of you, that soul, which isn't really encased in your body, wouldn't they have more in common with the way the transhumanists see it than what I'm describing? That's just a question.
I don't think so. Probably Jake has a more sophisticated and historically grounded response than me, but just real quick, I agree with you, and that's why I have such a hard time, like, even just envisioning what this end world would look like, is because I don't actually think that you can reduce a human being to data or algorithm, or I just think it's more than that. But to me, like the Christian thing, I get what you're saying, but most Christians don't argue that you are supposed to be trying to transcend or augment your material body, like in this lifetime. Like they accept that we're here, earthly incarnation, whatever. I don't know what the biblical language is for it. And they may have that idea that there's something, the soul that is maybe completely separable from your material vessel or body. But to me, there's like a fundamental difference there with accepting that you are human here in this lifetime. And yes, they may believe that after you die, you go on and your soul lives on in some other, even like romanticized afterlife, we could say. But to me, that's very different than a transhumanist who's like, let's do it now. Like, let's develop the technology now.
Let me be clear. I believe that most Christians, when they hear the transhumanist stuff, they're like, fuck no, I don't want that.
It's satanic.
I'm just kind of curious. I'm just saying there was a way that they seem similar. So, and I hear what you said. So I'm curious, Eduardo and Jake, do you see that same similarity, or do you see, like Jessica, like, no, there's a real difference between the way they're putting it?
So it kind of depends, like, which denomination you're talking about at a certain level. No, I mean, because like there's denominations where, when you're resurrected, right, after the final judgment and all that, like you're resurrected in your body, right? Like you still like Christ was resurrected in body, right? When he came out of the tomb, right? So, like there's a lot of talk in the Bible about the sins of the flesh, but that doesn't mean that Christianity basically thinks that your body, your flesh, is fundamentally evil. That's really more of a Gnostic approach to it. But I will say that, so if you go to other, there's a Mormon Transhumanist Association, right? And now Mormons are definitely, if you ask Catholics, Orthodox, and even a lot of Protestants, Mormons, right? They have the Book of Mormon, right? They don't use the same text, so they would consider them heretical, right? But so then you do have different denominations and that do see it as right when you're born, when you're resurrected, you're just a spirit at that point. But I think if you were going with the apostolic, right, interpretation, whether it's a Catholic Orthodox or maybe Protestants, a broad brush, right? But something like Presbyterians, like in particular, they would see it. It would not be compatible for the reasons that I sort of laid out. Eduardo would.
Yeah, Eduardo, what do you think?
Yeah, tell us what the Jehovah's Witnesses.
Yeah, what the JWs.
I told you guys, Jehovah's Witnesses came to my door with a fucking QR code not too long ago. I was like, you gotta be kidding me.
They got to him.
Well, I mean, I don't think it's too far from what everything has been said. That Jehovah's Witnesses, though, unlike other Christian denominations, or other Christian sects, I'll say, SECTS, not SEX. In my opinion, they're different because Jehovah's Witnesses only believe 144,000 will go to heaven, and other Christian beliefs think that everyone's going to heaven too. So humans continue to live a long life in paradise after Armageddon here on Earth as humans, not as anything else, just immortal. Just like Adam and Eve were immortal, they were to live forever, and that was the whole purpose of God's plan on this planet. So it was just to live forever as humans. Not as angels or anything, not as spirits, not to be uploaded up to heaven clouds, so to speak. But so that I think is different, because when I talk to other Christians, other people, they tend to talk about like after you're dead, your soul goes to heaven or stuff like that. And Jehovah's Witnesses don't believe in a soul like that. They don't think that there's something interior. They just believe we're just, once you die, and then you're resurrected if you did God's will, or if you were ignorant, such as the three of you, not me, because I'm informed, I'm educated, I know, I was enlightened, and I decided to be an apostate, so I don't have hope for resurrection. But the three of you, lost souls, not like spirit souls, but the three of you, as lost sheep of God, you will have a chance after Armageddon to come back and given a chance to be Jehovah's Witnesses.
Eduardo, when I get that second chance, I'll say, I'll do it if you bring Eduardo back.
Yeah.
And you'll die.
You'll die. I just want to add to it, that's also why the church, that's why cremation is frowned upon, right? Like you bury the body, you're not supposed to, right? The body is important. It's supposed to be, right? It's supposed to be resurrected. So
yeah, now like
well,
you guys your responses, I was actually just thinking like back for a second to the surrogacy thing that you brought up, Eduardo, which to me that is sort of this stepping stone to what they call like ectogenesis, right? Which is this idea of like birth or being born outside of a womb, which, I mean, the Christ or Jesus coming out of the cave, being reborn kind of is that in a way. And even there obviously Mary's womb was there, but the idea of the Immaculate Conception, I don't know, is that transhumanist? I don't know. I mean, my experience of like actual Christians in the world is that a lot of them have a deep like respect for the human body and also nature. Like we haven't really talked about that, but like, God, transhumanists fucking hate nature. And that's one reason I asked the question about like what's gonna power all this shit, because the ecosystems are gonna be completely destroyed. Right. But yeah, I mean, I guess some of the sort of stories, the Christian mythology, like I can see how it has a sort of transhumanist leaning in some ways based on my limited biblical readings from the age of 0 to 7.
The only thing I would say is that, I mean, perhaps you could look metaphorically at some passages, but I mean, the bottom line is that, like, as I've said repeatedly on the show, and as many of these books here, like they one of the premises is that they will be their own gods. That is fundamentally that is what the serpent tells Adam and Eve in the garden. It's not, you know what I mean? It's not what God tells you. You're not supposed to try to be your own God, right? Like, you're not supposed to try to transcend, the moral law and the categories of reality that we've been given. I mean, that's sort of the definition of the sin, right? It's basically, transgressing rather than transcending, the moral categories that we have, right? But I wanted to say as well that this notion of the I, because this is something that I kind of regret not adding at the end of that presentation I did with all the artwork and when we were talking about transgenders and transhumans and all that, and that is that like that question about, is there an I, or is the I that I experience in my inner monologue inside my head, which I perceive to be my soul, right? But when I say I, when I'm in 20 years, when I'm old and wrinkly and everything, right? And I say I'm referring to that same thing, that same experience, that same essence, whatever it is, right? And I'm referring to the same thing when I think back when I was a kid, even though I have a totally different body, right? And so, if you're someone like Yuval Noah Harari, like he poses the question basically, like, is that just ephemeral? Is it just noise? Is it like the analogy he uses is the roar that an engine makes when a plane is flying through the air? Meaning, right, like the sound does not propel the engine or the plane, right? It has no function on what the plane is or does as far as its ability, right, to get off the ground and land, right? It's secondary. It's just noise. It doesn't mean anything. It's not an agent in the process. And if you believe that, well, then I guess it's we don't need to answer the question about whether or not when we copy ourselves, we will still exist there. Your soul or whatever will go into it. But at the end of the day, we'll never have the answer to that question, because the only way it's like the experience of pain, right? This is why when you go to the doctor's office, there's no metrics to say how much pain you're experiencing. It's totally subjective. It totally has to do with the I, that experience, that inner monologue, that thing, that the narrative and the experience in here, right? Like my friend got knots in my hands from kung fu and stuff, and I got a friend back before COVID, and I existed in reality with human beings and had personal relationships with people, but he would. It's a knot and it hurts really bad, and he knows it hurts because he can feel it. And I'm like, and he's like, man, he got a really high pain tolerance, meaning like my wife, right? She wouldn't, she wouldn't get that far, right? Once it started hurting a little bit, it would be like, ouch, too much. So when you're at the doctor and you got the pictures there, right? Smiley face, right? 1 to 10. They have to ask you, and you have to tell them, because that's the only metric they have to be able to say, does this hurt too much, right? So, meaning when you get copied, right, the only way you'd know if that thing is still the I is if you asked it. So if you ask it and it goes, yeah, I'm still me, except that you don't know that if it's programmed to saying that, or if it actually is, if it's actually having an experience. You would only know that if you were copied. So in other words, the only answer to the question is to be copied. Like, we can't get that question, which means that what this leads to is the point that I wanted to make on the other show, which is that the existence of the I, the self, the core of the identity, the essence, the soul, whatever you want to call it, you have to have faith that it is there. You have to believe in it. There's no way to, it's not, remember when I had the dog with all the categories, right? To what is a dog? Well, it's got 4 legs, and it's got hair, and it barks. Well, remember that Rathblatt, she says, she makes the distinction, like, well, we're going to move from people saying, I'm not my genes, to I'm my being. Well, you're still defining yourself in terms of these secondary categories, which are all transmutable, which is the process they're describing. So if there is an I, it is not any of those secondary categories. It's that thing that exists within it and transcends all of it. And the only way that you can experience it or know it is to believe that it's there. And conversely, if you don't believe that it's there, if you don't believe there's an I, then why are we having this conversation? I mean, you know what I mean? Why are we having this conversation? I mean, what that would preclude is that it's all just evolution. Whether or not there's an I, whether or not it goes into the machine, whether or not you still exist, whether or not people are exploited or horribly experimented upon, or whether they even suffer, doesn't matter, because there's no I in there, and it's all just evolution, and it's for progress anyways. And so that's to me, I think there has to be a faith or a belief component to any concept of identity, I guess is what I'm thinking.
Thank you, Jake, for trying to end this episode on the question of, do we all believe in a soul or not?
Well,
that's such a.
We can bring it back and just refer to the self, right? Is there a self? Because that's a totally post.
We're going to have to do an episode on, is there a soul? That's clearly what's going to have to happen. That's a good point, though.
But I know you're an atheist, Andy, but don't you? I don't think it has to even be framed through soul. Like when you hear Rathblatt talking, and even the people who ask the questions in the Q&A.
Oh no, I think what Jake's saying
is so sad that there's an element of sadness, and maybe this is me just projecting my worldview onto it, but to me, they just sound like it's people that got picked last in PE class in the 7th grade and just never got over it, and now they're these full-grown men who are not willing to reckon with their trauma and are taking it out by literally trying to destroy humanity and the whole world as we know it with them. And I feel that is fundamentally, I think, is Martine Rathblatt just so terrified or traumatized by the notion of whatever his I, whether it's a soul or whatever, that he's just unwilling to to debate. I don't know. I mean, it might just be my view.
No, I mean,
it's just there's just an element of sadness which to me is unquantifiable.
First of all, I agree with you. After I saw the Martine Rathblatt video, I mean, this was the book I read, the Marxist Theory on Alienation, right? Because that I can't speak to a person who seemed more alienated than that person. I don't feel sorry for them because they're a fucker, and they're trying to do destructive things to people under the name of trying to help people, and I'm disgusted by them. But I do think they are a product, like many of us, like much of the ills that are here, that humans experience of that alienation. But I really do think that question of soul, I'm not being oh, I'm an atheist, there's no soul. I am an atheist. I have a question about what I think Christians call souls, and what would because there's some things I can't explain. So what do I say exists then? So that's why he's opening up a door that I would like to talk about more, that gets us into a different conversation, because I don't think transhumanists give a shit about souls or not souls. They're just looking to destroy and use up for themselves. They're I think the way Jake put it was maybe the new definition biblically is transhumanists are basically people who want to prove that the snake was right and God was wrong.
I don't want to go on my tirade about Gnosticism and the Gnostic garden story. I've said it many times on the show. You've all heard it before. I feel like I've talked too much today.
No, it was great to have you, Jake.
I think that's a good place to end.
Yeah, and it was really, again, the piece that I think that I really appreciate you bringing in, which we could have discussed more, is just the eugenicist roots of this thing, which I keep forgetting because I think of it so digitally, but I forget that it has very old non-digital roots.
Yeah. I wish I wanted to know that one, but I should have said, I should have saved it. We talked about it beforehand, but you remember that they all, there were several people there that said, I can't wait to meet you in person. In a conversation where they're saying that your digital representation of yourself is just as good as, if not better, than your physical self. So then why do you need to meet this person in person if what you're doing now is the same thing, if not better? And what and they were totally unaware of what that implies about this theory.
Yeah, I feel like, I don't know, maybe that's hopeful because, yeah, like there was this element that, too bad you're not here in person, or like, oh, let's get a coffee or a beer sometime. Like these, like, taste. Oh my God, like what would it be like to consume something and that tastes good or makes you feel good in your body? And even like, homeboy's a fucking billionaire and he doesn't have like a ring light or something, right? Like he's sitting there in the dark in this, like, I mean, I think Eduardo's quality is bad right now, but like, it's just bizarre. Like, it just shows you're like, are you just not, you're giving a fucking like transhumanist convention on this big stage and you don't have a light bulb or something? Like, it just, to me, it's all like evidence that it's just a house of cards or something. I don't know.
Well,
like they clearly want connection. They want to meet in person. They want human connection.
Right, and that's right, and that's what I'm saying. That's evidence that their theory is wrong. That there is a self. That your digital self is not the same, because otherwise you wouldn't want to see the person in person. And the other thing that stood out to me was the whole thing's about non-binary. There's all these ambiguous areas. But then the one lady asks her, and she goes, "Well, you had this flow chart, and it was like all these things that led to transhumanism, and then there's this other, and everything else led to suffering." Sounds like a binary to me. It's either transhumanism or suffering, right? And that's how and then she goes, and like she clearly looked like she had not thought of it like that. Like was totally oblivious to it and was like, I'll have to, revive that. So it's like, it's just another example of the blind spots in a lot of this stuff. But hey, when it gets money and funding and support from the World Economic Forum, I guess you wouldn't know that your theory didn't hold water because everybody's giving you money and promoting.
Can I just say though that I didn't see that question, but I actually believe that Rosenblatt. Rathblatt. I don't fucking. I believe
Martin's old name.
I don't care about their name. They're jerks. But I believe that they actually are right in that, because I actually do believe that it's going to be the transhumanists and the sufferers. But I don't think that that's how they're thinking about it. They're thinking about it like, oh, we can go this direction, as if they're taking everyone on Noah's Ark. But nah, there's going to be the transhumanists and the sufferers. And I think there's going to be a set of us doing that thing.
Well, I'll take suffering.
And I agree with you. Yeah. I'd rather be a worker than a capitalist.
I was going to note earlier when I almost interrupted Andy, you may or may not need to record this, but when you talked about the surrogate thing coming out of eugenics, it was William Shockley and another guy who set up what was known as the Genius Sperm Bank. It's called the Repository for Germinal Choice, I believe was the name of it. It's the 80s or 90s. But it was this thing set up by William Shockley, who was an explicitly avowed eugenicist, right? He's cited in my book. I won't digress. But the whole idea that sperm bank was, so that they could basically, women that wanted a surrogate or whatever, that you could have genius babies, and that, so it's literally a eugenics comes directly out of it. Yeah.
And in like the Western world, like regulated surrogacy, like you better be white, you better have no tattoos, you better meet every fucking, check every box. It's insane, the requirements.
There was this documentary about, I wish I could remember the name or the guy that it was about, but this guy that was running a fertility clinic, it's not funny. It wasn't telling, because it's so ridiculous. It wasn't telling these women that he was giving them, apparently he was giving them his semen.
I remember that.
And there was like these people somehow through a 23andMe or something, they started to find out that they were related, and it was a ridiculous
super father or whatever.
Yeah, I remember that.
Doesn't Elon Musk have talk about similar stuff of he wants his seed spread all over or whatever?
Supposedly Jeffrey Epstein said it.
Oh yeah, that too. Yeah,
Supposedly. Now I do know that I've done the research on it. That he did fund a lot of AI and other, I can't remember the particulars, but various foundations and institutes that were into AI and all types of stuff like that. So a lot of the stuff that fits into the transhumanist agenda, and supposedly there were quotes from people that were there that said he talked about eugenics quite a bit.
Well, these billionaires doing what they want. This discussion, this episode it went elsewhere, and I think it's all related, but it really did give us new, or at least it gave me a new perspective, and also just something new for us to discuss on what's left. It's not like it's nothing related to actually what we've already discussed in the past, but it is always good to revisit. And then I'm glad you were here, Jake, for us to have you on.
I feel like we all need to go put our feet in some grass and
yes.
Ground.
Well, there's a lot to discuss. I think we'll have to invite Jake for another episode for this, and we'll have to pull out everything we know about psychedelics and theology. All right, let's do this. That's it. That does it for this week's episode. What's Left is a weekly political podcast / channel challenges the mainstream left. We post information about our topics and our guests on the episode notes where we found this episode, or on our blog, what'sleftpodcast.com. Again, that's what'sleftpodcast.com. You can find past episodes to this podcast / channel there and connect with us. I remind folks, if you like anything you've heard here, please subscribe, rate, review, turn on your notifications to any of our various platforms on the Spotify, iTunes Podcast, Stitcher, Google Play, Bitchute, Odysee, YouTube, Rumble, or Telegram. You can find our blog in any of those links in the episode notes where we found this episode. And if you would like to give us feedback about something you've heard or suggest something for us to cover, contact us through our blog. I'm Eduardo Barco with co-hosts Jessica and Andy Lipson. And thank you very much, Jake, for joining us. We look forward to having you again in the future. And everyone should check out his book, The School World Order, The Technocratic Globalization of Corporatized Education. That does it for this week's episode. Thank you very much. We'll see you all next time. Ciao.